All right. Thanks, everybody, again, so much for joining us today. This afternoon, we're going to be chatting a little bit about funding your art practice and how to kind of write persuasively for funding applications, for residency applications. And we're going to kind of end our little chat today with some writing prompts that can help us get started on these types of materials. So my name is Eilish. I am one of the two career advisors that works for the Creative Careers team. And I specifically support students who are in kind of the visual art and communications and the media and technology division. So a lot of students who are really interested in funding their work through these unique ways. And I'm so excited to be joined today by Ruben and Amelia. If you guys want to introduce yourselves as well.
Sure. Thank you so much, Eilish. My name is Ruben Maringer. I'm manager of the Learning Resource Center along with Amelia here. And I'm also an Art Center alum. And up until a couple of years ago, I actually worked part-time for a nonprofit that funded art and experimental music projects, but also we got funding from other places like the Department of Cultural Affairs, City of West Hollywood, and that sort of thing. So I'm bringing some of my knowledge of grant writing and the persuasive writing that is incorporated in that to this workshop. So I'll be sharing kind of my insights from what I gleaned there.
Yeah. I'm Amelia. I am the co-manager of Learning Resource Center. I'm also a film alum, and I'm excited to get this workshop started.
Amazing. Very cool. Okay. So let's just run through kind of our schedule, for lack of a better term, for today. So we're just going to kind of introduce this idea of funding your practice. We chatted a little bit about it in the first part of this Funding Your Art Practice series, but I want to reintroduce it and just kind of get us on the ground floor of what we're chatting about today. Then we're going to run through kind of a nice allegory to help us start thinking about our writing for this particular purpose and maybe get our brains working. Then we're going to run through the basics of persuasive writing, which is always really helpful. And then the basics of funding applications and how those things are really, really well tied. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to end today with a nice little writing breakout that'll give us some fun prompts to get started, whether we're interested in applying for funding in the immediate future or maybe in the longer term future. We can kind of hone and practice our responses to these prompts to get us in a great spot. So let's start with our introduction. So just so that we're, again, all on the same page, arts funding is a really broad term for a variety of different types of public and private funding sources. And these are going to provide different types of financial support for artists. So that's nonprofit organizations, state and federal government agencies, private sector companies, and even individuals who will set aside their own personal funds to support artistic endeavors. And something that's really important to note is that each of these different types of funding sources are going to have their own kind of spin or lean or goal for the outcome of their funding, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit, because that's really important to think about and incorporate when we're creating our application materials. So arts funding can include sources like grants and residencies and fellowships. Those are kind of the big picture of what we're going to talk about today. But again, grants are funds that you kind of apply to that usually hit a specific amount and that can be utilized to support a specific project, to support materials, to support yourself. Usually kind of well-being grants cover things like rent and other utility materials. Residencies are on-site funding experiences where you get to work on your practice or potentially a specific project at a specific location. And then fellowships are opportunities that are usually done kind of in partnership with your funding organization. And that can include anything from kind of funding and space to create, all the way up to an exhibition and kind of a public unveiling of your work, depending on the scope of the fellowship. But the foundation of all three of these funding sources and their applications include sharing the same types of information about ourselves and the same types of persuasive descriptions of our work, ourselves, and our goals. So again, no matter the funding source or the funder, you're going to need to be able to persuasively describe yourself, your work, and then how you plan to use the funding that you're applying for in order to be considered as an applicant. And it's really important for us to keep in mind that an application for arts funding is not necessarily successful because you're the most creative applicant or the most artistically talented applicant. It's the applicant that crafts the best application, which, is also a talented person, but that the process of crafting and creating that application is really hugely important in the success of your application. So that's hopefully what we're going to be able to provide a bit of a foundation for today. So let's kick us off, Ruben, with our mutual benefit allegory.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so here we see a big empty field. So this big empty fertile field, it's owned by a gardener who wants to turn it into a garden that will help nourish the community. But they need seeds that are carefully chosen and nurtured to bring this vision to life. Next slide. So hearing about this, a group of growers come forward, each with a handful of seeds. They have knowledge, they have passion, but they need soil, they need sunlight and water to help these seeds grow. Next slide. So the gardener provides them all the water and supplies that they need to grow these seeds and transform that empty field into a thriving, colorful garden. They do this, the community enjoys it, and visitors come to see it and bring recognition to both the gardener and the growers, and it flourishes for the years to come. Next slide. So in this allegory that I shared with you, that gardener with the big empty field is like an organization that funds the arts. And the growers, of course, they're the artists. Both parties have their own mission. They both have their own vision. And this arrangement benefits both by taking the strengths and the resources of each and figuring out where their missions meet and how they can mutually benefit each other. Next slide. And so, to bring it to the arts, another simple allegory would be a situation where your friend has some unused art supplies, they don't need them. You have this specific project and you could use them, but you have no other way to get them. You don't have the budget for them. They're rare and other friends also want them as well. So if you imagine yourself in this scenario, you think about what would be in it for you, what is in it for your friend, that mutual benefit that we're talking about, and then how do you go about asking them and making your case? And I find it helps, in the next slide, please, to kind of put yourself on their side of things. And I've kind of been on both sides, and it really kind of helps to empathize with your funder by thinking about what they want. So if you were the one with the extra supplies, how would you decide who gets them? Next slide. So as artists and designers, you can be very project driven in your mission, whether that's something you need funding for or you need a place to work, like in a residency, even if it's just maintaining your practice or just getting extra rent money. A lot of these organizations, they just want to help artists be able to survive. So funders, likewise, they have an interest in supporting artists to meet their own mission. And with so many artists in need, so many artists wanting those rare, valuable art materials, it's important that the mission of a funder and the mission of the funded artist benefit each other mutually. So often the funders themselves, which was my situation, are recipients of donations or funding to their organization, and they have to answer to that. So this requires when they are sifting through piles of applications by so many brilliant artists, they need to kind of look at the cold logic of it. And they might use a rubric, to sort through so many applications with all of these boxes to tick in order to ensure that they can make the best possible decisions so that the money or the resources can go to the person that has the greatest need or demonstrates the best relationship to whatever their mission is. And so this chain of accountability illustrates why your ask, your application, your letter of interest, whatever you're contributing to your application, it should be persuasive, it should be clear, it should avoid any over-reliance on abstractions. Like I remember writing these and really wanting to get philosophical and stuff, but that doesn't really help the person that's reviewing it. They're looking for all of these sorts of things, these metrics that meet what they need to do in order to fulfill their mission and yours. So you kind of have to recognize that there is a logic behind how these decisions are made, which gets down to the writing. That persuasive, clear writing should have a logic to it and be very straightforward and not rely on abstractions that will just confuse the reader and make it difficult to figure out what boxes to check for your application and how to rate them. And I'll pass the mic back over to Amelia.
Yeah. So I'm going to be talking you through some of the basics of persuasive writing that are going to help you kind of formulate these ideas. So next slide. Okay, so you might be thinking you've never written anything close to a grant application if you've never done this kind of writing before. But chances are, if you've written an essay for an academic class or a cover letter or even some other job application, you've definitely done some persuasive writing. And there are elements that you can pull from writing you've likely done before that will be important to have in this kind of funding application. The first is the thesis. So this is the heart of your writing and your main argument. You might have written essays where the thesis is to convince your professor that an artist or designer is the greatest or most influential in the field. You might be writing about a book and making a point. Now your thesis is going to be about you. So what is a central reason why this grant or funding is crucial to supporting your work? What is the heart of your work? And that thesis is going to be that main argument and point that's going to carry you through the entire piece of writing you're making. And all your ideas are going to stem back to that main point. Next is the outline. So outlining is important to any piece of writing you do, whether it's an essay or grant application or even a poem to a loved one. It's especially important in something like a grant application where you don't have a lot of words or time to get your point across. So like Ruben said, avoiding that kind of vague, not really concise writing is really important. And outlining will make sure that all the points you want to make are going to be there in your writing and all the points you don't want to make will not be there. So everything you need will be there, and you can remove all the fluff that does not serve the purpose of your writing. So write out all your main points, your introduction, your conclusion, and piece them together in a way that creates a story. There's a clear connection from point A to point B, and there's a clear argument being formed. One way you can make an argument is also using the meal paragraph formula. So we have our cute little hamburger friend here to help us demonstrate that. But a meal paragraph is basically a way to construct an argument so it's healthy, it's well-rounded, and it's well-structured. So it's four basic components. There's the main idea. So this is your main statement, the point you're trying to prove. There's evidence. So you might be used to using evidence like statistics or quotes from a book. In this case, it's going to be evidence that could be things about your work, maybe information or statistics from events you've put on or whatever it might be. Next would be analysis. So this is commentary about the evidence, and we're explaining the evidence and how it's connecting back to that idea. And lastly is a link. So we don't want to just leave our readers kind of making that connection themselves. We want to sort of make the connection for them and connect everything back to the main idea. And this is all connecting back to that thesis too. What this ensures is that your entire grant application is really well structured from A to B. And it's not just kind of a rambly collection of ideas. It's going to help you in the same way it helps you write any other kind of essay you've written before. So it's not a super new, inventive type of writing. Chances are you've done elements of it before, and you can definitely use it to do this. I'm going to pass it back to Ruben to talk about rhetorical devices.
Thank you so much, Amelia. So I'm a painter, and when I'm painting, sometimes but not always, I have like a palette set up, right? I've got my colors that I know that I want to use in order to kind of unify things and kind of meet the vision that I have and have some constraints to work with. When you're writing, and you're writing persuasively, and you've got like that structure that Amelia talked about, you can kind of think about the palette that you have of these devices that you can use in order to convince and persuade and move your audience. That's what rhetoric is. Rhetoric is simply like using language in order to move an audience. And so like we go back to the Greeks with this, we've got four rhetorical devices that have their applications in different situations, but it's important to have them on your palette to know that you can use them and when to use them and how to mix them together, because they're not always discrete from each other. So the four that we have are logos, ethos, pathos, and kairos. Logos, like it sounds, is an appeal to logic. So you might be using data and facts. Ethos, that's an appeal to credibility or authority. So you want to point to your own expertise on a topic, or you might want to point to an authority on the subject. Whatever professional voice is something that you can incorporate into your own writing. Pathos, if you think of words like sympathy, empathy, pathetic, this is about the emotions. So you want to, this is, you create a vividly effective image that might compel your reader to be moved emotionally, to see the significance and the importance of what you're talking about. And then finally, kairos is an appeal to timeliness. So if there's a need for urgency, like to act now, or hesitation, like maybe now is not the best time, that's what kairos is talking about. And then I'll give you some examples of each. So next slide. I'm going to use Disneyland because everyone loves Disneyland, or maybe not, but I do. So like imagine you're trying to convince your parents to take you to Disneyland this year. So for logos, you would say, we should go to Disneyland this year. That's your main thesis. There are rides and attractions for all ages, meaning the whole family can enjoy the trip together. Plus, if we go during the off season, ticket prices are lower and wait times are shorter, making it a smarter investment. This makes it a good choice for our family budget. Kind of wrapping it up there with that conclusion. So that's using logic and practicality in order to persuade your parents to take you to Disneyland. Next slide. So ethos, we should go to Disneyland this year. Same thesis, but different support. So we should go to Disneyland this year. I've done all the research on ticket prices, best times to visit, and hotel options. I even made a budget plan to show how we can afford it without overspending. So this is you establishing yourself as an expert on the subject, demonstrating the application of it. But you can also like kind of call in someone off to the side to kind of swing for you. So we've got Plus, I've shared links to some articles by travel writers who are known for reporting honestly to families who are on a budget but wish to travel. So don't just take my word for it. So we've got the credibility of the writer, but then also other people that are on board with this notion of going to Disneyland this year. So we've got these experts coming in. Next slide. Pathos, we should go to Disneyland this year. My fondest memories of our family have been cuddling up and watching our favorites on rainy afternoons. Imagine how meaningful it would be to see some of those characters in real life and all the photographs we can treasure for the rest of our lives. So now we've got nostalgia coming in, excitement. We can see the family enjoying these things and imagine what it would be like to be seeing these characters in person, grabbing photographs, and then looking and laughing for the years to come. Now, finally, kairos. We should go to Disneyland this year. The 70th anniversary means there are special parades and limited time attractions that won't happen again. If we miss out, we might regret it and should book early for cheaper airfare and better rates. So this is like, now is the time to do that. We don't want to pass this up. We might regret it. And, I'm using Disneyland here, but there could be all sorts of examples that you've probably written about in your academic classes. And maybe you can think about the nature of your work and how that can apply to these rhetorical devices, depending on what your subject matter is, depending on where you want to go for a residency and what they care about, or what grants and what their interests are, and seeing how they line up and how you can persuade using those things. Next slide. But since every artist, you are all different, every funder is different, there is a constellation of funders and residencies out there. And so with every case being different, it's important to have your work reviewed, especially while you're here. Utilize the Writing Center, utilize Creative Careers, and we can help you structure and apply these rhetorical devices that in a way that's compelling and persuasive for your reader and ultimately your funder.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ruben and Amelia. I want to take us into the actual logistics of a couple of funding applications now. I think that we're going to really clearly be able to see the ways in which some of those persuasive writing techniques and kind of the uniqueness of every funding opportunity appear in these two particular opportunities. But we're also going to see the way that some of the prompts we're looking at today are actually going to come up across almost all types of funding opportunities. And the way in which we need to have a really strong, developed understanding of ourselves and our practice in order to approach any funding application at all. So, of course, much like every other type of persuasive writing, applying for funding for your art practice requires you to know your audience. Again, who is your funder? What is unique about them? Perhaps where do they get their funding for? Etc. Know your work. What about your work is unique? What about your work is different than other work that is going on? What about your work is complementary to other work that is currently going on? And then finally, we really want to know how both of those things complement each other. So, what are your audience's goals? What are your funder, in this particular case's goals for the outcome of their funding? And how does that complement your work? And how does your work complement it? Right. And I think that we think of this question and our mind immediately goes to my funder complements my work by funding my work, right? That's how those two things are kind of connected. But more importantly, we can start to think of things like maybe what type of audience can my funder create for my work? If I am interested in a fellowship opportunity that creates exhibition space for the project that it would be funding, what type of audience can my work now get in front of? How am I able to potentially attract new clientele if I want to sell my art pieces? If I'm interested in making a certain type of commentary with my art, does the audience that my funder or my funder itself create for my work create more of an opportunity for that statement to be made? Or does it get to the right people, for example? And then, of course, on the other end of that, we want to think about how our work complements the goals of our funder. So, does it speak to the same type of social topic that the funder is passionate about? Does it create the same type of engagement opportunities that the funder is excited about? Again, there are lots of different complementary connections that we can make. And going through some of the prompts that we're going to look at is really going to help us maybe identify those to make our funding applications a little bit more of a structured and easy process. So let's take a look at, first and foremost, the Lightning Fund by LACE, or the Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions. So the Lightning Fund is something that occurs every year by application. It's an approximately $6,000 artist grant. And when we look at the guidelines, I know that the text here is very small, so I'm going to read a couple of highlighted pieces. But specifically, LACE says we are open to innovation, experimentation, and risk-taking in the field and are supportive of diverse approaches. Additionally, they say that they want work to be socially relevant as well as accessible to the public outside of traditional museum or gallery settings. So this tells me a few things about my audience. Number one, I want to be able to demonstrate risk-taking and diverse approaches to art making or creation in my grant application. That might come up in a few different ways. It might come up in my description about myself and my own work. It might come up in a description of the project that I want to include. It might come up in demonstrations of other projects that I have worked on in the past. The second thing that we notice here, again, is that they want the work to be not only socially relevant, but accessible to the public outside of traditional museum or gallery settings. So when I think about potentially a project that I would be proposing in this particular case, or when I think about how to demonstrate my own applicability for the project, I need to be thinking about ways in which my work can exist, perhaps non-traditionally, or be publicly accessible, because we now know that that's important to this particular application and for this particular funder. So if I was to approach this particular grant application, I'd want to highlight these 2 points just so that I have them and can immediately refer back to them. I can then go down to the actual application materials list. And they list out a few different things. Number one, artist contact information. That's nice and easy. Number two, a website or social media, if it's available. Great. The third thing here is a great opportunity space for us to start thinking about today. A brief description about yourself and your artistic practice, include past project experience. And we have listed here a 300-word max. And 300 words is a lot less than you think it is. 300 words is not that many words, which is fun, right? So now I know that I need to submit a description of myself and my creative practice, and I need to include any past project experience that I have. This tells me that this particular funder is very interested in fundees who have successfully executed a similar type of project in the past. Perhaps because they know that previous experience managing the logistics of something like this increases the chances that a fundee will be able to successfully participate or execute this project, right? So, in my brief description of myself and my artistic practice, I need to talk about my risk taking in my art, perhaps the diverse approaches that I take. I also need to talk about how this would be particularly publicly accessible, or how I've previously created publicly accessible art and shepherded a project of this type from inception through execution and exhibition. That will show that I'm experienced perhaps in this subject or experienced in this type of opportunity, and that, for lack of a better term, they can trust that funding me will support their goals. Our next piece here is our project title and then a description of our proposed project. And this can be a new project or a continuation of work. And this particular description, they say, should include timeline and collaborators, materials, location, and any other needs that I might have in order to make that project happen. And again, I have a 500-word max here, which, as we just remembered, is not actually a lot of words. So going back to our original notes that we took from the information about our funder, we need to make sure that our proposed project demonstrates risk-taking and diverse approaches to art making in the field, and that it is going to be publicly accessible or kind of engaging outside of a traditional museum or gallery setting. And I need to make sure that I'm including all of those other logistical notes in 500 words or less. So going back to our persuasive writing technique and really utilizing an outline to strip down a lot of the, we might call it fluff or additional content, to the most bare bones structure of, here is my perfect package that I'm presenting to you, is going to be the most helpful. And then our next two pieces here, an outline of how the grant will be used to offset the costs of the project. And the majority of the project should be achievable with the Lightning Fund grant. Again, now I know that they're looking for me to be able to execute most of this project with this grant funding. So this can't be perhaps a massive undertaking that will require additional thousands of dollars. They want to be able to see that I can get this off the ground with mostly just this grant. And then our last note here, some work samples. That could be images, video, audio that represent the project you were proposed for funding. And optional images could include other audio links, supplementary material. I might even want to show images of a past project that I've executed, as we make note up here of the past project experience that they're looking for us to demonstrate, so that, again, we can show that we've successfully executed a project of this variety. And the last thing that we want to make note of here is our selection criteria. They're going to be considering our application based on overall concept, vision, and innovation, which goes back again to our risk-taking, our look of diverse approaches. then relevance to a local social, cultural, or geographic context, and accessibility of the project to the public outside of a museum or gallery. Again, goes back to our point right up here. The capacity of the applicant to realize the project on time within 1 year and within the estimated budget. And going back to our list of materials, demonstrating our past project experience will showcase that we have the capacity to execute this project within this budget. And then finally, potential impact on the local community, the arts and culture landscape, and/or the artist's growth, right? So going back again to some of our points, we have the description of our proposed project, making sure that it's innovative and socially relevant. And we may even take a look again at strong consideration will be given to a list of specific communities where they might particularly be interested in the potential impact that our work could have on our communities. Now, this is a really, really well-described and specific application. We get a lot of information about what our funders might want and how we can structure an application based on what they've provided to us here. And I think hypothetically, if I were to take this to the learning resource centers and to a writing center coach and say, hey, can you help me manage or work through this application? They'd be able to use a lot of context clues to help kind of narrow down and adjust my application materials to support what is specifically being asked for. But what happens if our application doesn't necessarily contain as much context that we can pull from, right? The next example that I want to take a look at before we jump into our kind of writing prompts for today is the Quinn Emanuel Burkhart Artist in Residency program. Now, Quinn Emanuel is a law firm. They are a national law firm that has offices all over the country. And one of the programs that the law firm supports is this Artist in Residency program. And fun fact, this program is currently being recruited for. Applications are live on Art Center Connect for anybody who's interested. But let's take a look at their application instructions. This is a lot less text, a lot less information, right? So we have applicants should include the following components: a proposal of their project, 500-word max in the body of an email, a resume and CV, and then a digital portfolio submitted in a single PDF, highlighting up to 8 original works that represent style, quality, and practice over time. So we don't want necessarily to share our most recent pieces or our most, what we might consider our best pieces only. We want to be able to demonstrate progression of practice over an extended period to show how we are kind of growing and settling into our practice as artists. And then, of course, we get some details here about file size, which should be considered. And then finally, our timeline. So residency begins in April 2025 and lasts for 4 months. And then an exhibition will be offered to the resident after the residency is completed. So I know that my project proposal, which is a little bit less specific in terms of content than the previous one we looked at, is something that should be completed within 4 months. I need to be able to complete this within 4 months. And it has to be something that makes sense for an exhibition on what would be a law firm property following the end of my residency. So if I'm kind of batting around a couple of projects that I'm interested in getting funding for, I might think about which one is the most applicable for this space and for this community. And if I'm not sure about that, then what would be really, really beneficial for me to do if I was on the webpage would be to tab right over to this Meet the Artists section here. This includes a list of current and previous artists in residence that the firm has funded and supported. And we can get a lot of information from where previous funding has gone. Number one, are there trends? Are they really interested in artists that work in particular mediums, right? Like maybe they funded 10 ceramicists over the course of the last 15 years. Or maybe they funded 0 ceramicists over the course of the last 15 years. That might tell us a little bit of something about where the people reviewing these applications are thinking about their work. We might also look at maybe, do most of the artists have a specific social critique that they're making? Is that really evident in their work, or is it like a little bit more subtle and subconscious as part of their work? And again, how does the work that I've done kind of mimic or fall in line with existing artists, or even complement the work that previous artists have done as part of this community of artists in residence that the firm is supporting? So even when we don't have a lot of information to go on in our application materials, we can use a lot of context clues that are in the overall description of the program to kind of gain information and tailor and tweak and present our application, again, in the most persuasive way. So with that, and with our about 20 minutes left in our time today, I want to give us an opportunity to kind of get some writing done. And this is very low stakes. Nobody needs to share out anything that they don't want to. But I want us to think about maybe this first question here. Describe yourself and your art practice in 100 words or less, including what makes your practice unique to you. And you'll notice that I specifically said 100 words or less, because very often we're going to be working with artist bio requirements or brief requirements that require us to utilize as few words as possible. So I think maybe it would be really great for us to take 5 minutes. For everybody who is joining us today, 5 minutes to just think about how you might describe yourself in your art practice. Try to make it as brief as possible. It doesn't have to be exactly 100 words or less. But at the end of those 5 minutes, I'd love to come back and maybe have 1 or 2 folks, whoever is interested, share their statement. Or alternatively, if maybe it was really difficult for you to get this definition or this sample out, I'd love to hear about maybe why it was difficult. And Ruben and Amelia, if you guys would like to share out any thoughts or any kind of words of encouragement to get us started while we're kicking off our writing, I would love to hear it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I always think about the upside down triangle. I don't know if anyone has ever showed you this in a writing class, where you start at the top of this triangle, everything's broad, right? Really general. It could be generic. It could be almost feel dumb, but it's actually really important to open up with this general statement that you then refine down into a place of specificity. So like, if it helps you get started, just think of the broadest general terms that you can describe your practice in. In my case, I would say something like, my practice is about the relationship between language and image. And from there, I can think about the terms in that first sentence and what I mean by them, or what my current body of work is about. So right now, I'm interested in the role of color in that. And I'm using these materials, computer inkjet ink, in order to undermine the role of consumer products, and then also undermine the color logic that we typically get in order to open up space for speculation. Something like that, where you can start really, really broad, but just really, really whittle it down. And that makes it a lot easier to get going, because you don't have to think too hard about that first sentence. Then you just respond to it.
Yeah. And also keep in mind that this is the brainstorming part of the writing process. So we're just starting. We don't have to have a perfectly, put together piece of writing to start with. Like Ruben said, we're going to start general, put our ideas out, and feel free to use a practice that works for you. Some people like to free write and just get all the ideas out on a page and then whittle it down, choose what's important, and make that little statement. Some people like to talk out loud and just sort of talk to themselves about their practice. Whatever it works for you, just remember that we're not starting with the final product. There's a lot of steps to go before we get there. So just give yourself some grace and just enjoy kind of thinking about your art and thinking about the writing in this moment. And let's get started.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to set myself, let's say maybe 3 minutes from now, since we've chatted for a couple of minutes. So on my clock, that's 12:47. We'll come back. We can, if we want to, turn our screens off or keep them on, keep ourselves muted. We can keep ourselves on. camera, whatever we prefer, but we'll come back in just a few minutes. And again, I would love for somebody to either share out, or even if it was difficult, share what about that experience was difficult, and maybe we can work together to figure out how to support that again the next time that we try. Thanks, guys. And if you have any questions or any thoughts and you want to throw them in the chat in the meantime, before we come back, that's great too. See you in just over 2 minutes. All right. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that that was a nice couple of minutes to just maybe have a thought or maybe have no thoughts. That's okay as well. Um, I would love, again, to just kind of open up the floor. Does anybody want to share their kind of first draft of maybe how you would describe yourself in your art practice in this context? And you can unmute yourself if you want to say it out loud. You can drop it in the chat if you're comfortable with that, whichever you prefer.
I'll share. Should I just read it?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. My work explores the intersection of materials, memory, and the traces left behind by lived experiences, whether it's drywall, cement, or the subtle marks of everyday life. I'm fascinated by how materials capture the feeling of moments slipping by, like the scuff on a wall or the faded imprint of something that was once there. The way I demonstrate memories captured by these materials is by placing images on them. For example, in my latest series of works, I painted abstracted images of moments in a blurry, and that's all I got.
That was amazing. Great job, Josie. So can I just say something that I really loved about that is that you gave me a specific example so that I could envision what you meant by like the materiality of things capturing memories. So now as like maybe a not fine artist or as somebody who's thinking about what your work might physically look like in experience, I have a really, really specific understanding of that. That was awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
And just to kind of add on to that, starting with the general and going to the specific project, that's exactly, what I was talking about. And if you were to imagine reversing that and starting with the project and not having that framework preceding it, it wouldn't have that same impact because you're looking at that project through the lens of everything that you've established before then to make it make sense and give it some resonance with what you really care about in general.
Yeah, and I like that use of sensory language, again, letting us know how the art feels and allowing us to imagine it, because chances are people reading this may or may not be, like Eilish pointed to, artists themselves. They could be people just, trying to understand and feel something. And I think your writing did that very well.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to share? Again, you can unmute yourself or you can drop your description in the chat if that's more comfortable for you. Or alternatively, if maybe you don't feel ready to share, would you like to share something that was maybe difficult or exciting about trying to answer this question, given the information that we've just talked about over the last hour or so? Ruben or Amelia, do you guys maybe have a thought about like what you find to be most difficult when, or not difficult, but like where there's greatest opportunity space maybe when chatting with students about like how to describe their work and how to mention what is unique about it?
Amelia, I can go first. I think that's a great question. And so one thing that I always like to incorporate in coaching sessions when I'm working with students is to have the examples in front of me, have the application in front of me, and we could have an organic conversation about it. And I can ask you questions. I actually do this in my profession outside of Art Center as well. I visit artist studios to figure out how to write about them. And a lot of times that writing, it comes from the mouth of the artist themselves when they least expect it, when they're in a natural, organic discourse with someone else, asking questions, thinking through them in the presence of the work itself. And when I'm with a student, I might surreptitiously just type down some words and phrases that slip out of your mouth without realizing it, that ultimately are actually really effective, really compelling writing that's ultimately very unique to you. And so that sort of disarming quality that a good conversation can have, I like to have that in the writing center, and having your work in front of us, talking about it together is a really great way to bridge that gap between the visual and the lexical or the linguistic.
Yeah. And to that point, I just had a writing center session where the student I was with insisted that she was a terrible writer and could not get words on the page. And she was writing a statement of intent for an internship. I just said, well, how about you just talk me through some of your ideas? And like Ruben said, I was kind of like covertly typing as she was talking. And I had like a page of things, like wonderful ideas she was saying. And she looked at it and she was like, I said all that. And I was like, yes, you have all the ideas. It's just maybe writing it out is not the first way your brain will connect the words to the page. So definitely, think of non-traditional ways to get the brainstorming going. Sometimes it's just like, word vomiting, if you like to write by hand, if you like to record yourself talking, just find whatever gets that initial flow. And definitely, something you can do is talk to somebody, whether it's a writing coach or creative careers, or maybe just a friend or a peer about your writing. It's really, really valuable because you feel more relaxed. You feel like you can talk about it with someone who is maybe also in an artistic setting, who has work that they make as well. And I think it'll just make you more relaxed and easy to get the ideas out. So don't think that I have to put pen to paper and create something immediately. There's so many different ways and steps you can do to find your way of brainstorming, and we're all very different. So try some stuff and see what works for you.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite recommendations, especially if we're stuck, if we're like, it's really hard for me to think about what about my work is unique because maybe I'm not in the space to think about it uniquely. I'm like in class getting crit. I'm looking at other people's work all the time as well, is to ask a friend or a family member how they would describe your work and your art practice. Somebody who maybe has seen you through different iterations of your creative practice, who is really supportive and encouraging of your journey as artists and designers. To say, hey, like if you had to talk about my work to somebody else, how would you describe it? Even if maybe it's not how we would describe ourselves, sometimes it's really amazing to have an understanding of how somebody else sees us. And we can work that into our own description. It can be something that maybe we didn't even think was unique about our work, but we get that additional information. And like Amelia said, it can be really great to talk with other people and hear their interpretations of what we're saying, what we're doing, and how we're experiencing it. So the next little prompt that I want to give us, again, we have about 5 minutes left in our session this afternoon. So we don't need to take time away, but this is more so just a question to think about is, what are some unique focus areas that your work might speak to? So this could be things like maybe I'm really interested in talking about social impact, like, or maybe climate change. My work talks about the environmental impact of climate change through a certain medium. Or maybe your art is specifically designed to be interactive public art to increase public engagement with creation, right? And be a space for children to just experience more art. Or maybe your art's educational and its whole goal is to educate and inform and start a conversation about a new topic, right? Or any other number of unique focus areas that your work might have. So starting to think about not just, to go back to our first point here, how we would describe our work and what's unique about it, but what are some unique focus areas, populations, demographics that might be personally touched by our work? Does anybody have maybe an example or a thought of one? Again, Ruben and Amelia, you might have like thought about this for your own creative practices, for maybe a unique place that your work could exist or appeal to.
Well, it makes me think of a former faculty member of mine, amazing artist, all sorts of mediums. And I heard him in an interview say once, my work is about what happens when things go wrong. And it was just the most blanket, I used the word dumb earlier. Maybe that's not the best word for it, but like this very kind of blanket general statement. And through that lens, his work has gone into photography, film, new media, technologies, and kind of experimental digital practices and stuff, and figuring out where things break. Historical moments has been a subject matter, like riots and that sort of thing. And, and a lot of times, like, it might not be entirely obvious, but one of these like grants or these residencies, they might open it up as an opportunity to explore a new avenue of your practice. So even where you least expect it, like if, I'm interested in the relationship between language and image, I might go into perceptual psychology or consumer products that speak to that, or social media. I mean, there's all sorts of places that you can go to, but it's important to figure out which ones are. And once you have that, then you can start whittling down your list of applications, because these take time and you want to make sure you're spending the effort on something that's the most appropriate to what you're doing and where you want to go with your practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't kind of second what Ruben just mentioned enough, that sometimes the most kind of overwhelming part of the grants and funding and residencies application process is just how much exists, how many opportunities there are. It kind of feels a little bit ironic that it is exciting that there is so much potential funding out there, but also there's so much potential funding out there. Where do I even start? And that can put us in this kind of state of like arrest or concern about how to approach things. And a really amazing way is to start with who is going to potentially be the most impacted by my work and who is funding opportunities or exploring ways to engage with that same community, right? And it doesn't even have to necessarily be a really obvious option, but more so it helps us think backwards from what do I want to do with my work? What's my goal? To who else has that same goal? And maybe what organizations are funding those potential funders, as we talked about earlier. Sometimes it's maybe like a little shower waterfall of funding where it trickles down. Who is funding those funders that, again, potentially aligns with my goals? And being able to specifically say, my work touches these spaces, my work starts these conversations, my work is designed to impact these communities or groups or speak in this particular space, can really help you make that connection really immediate for your funder. Again, all of our persuasive writing techniques, which are like incredible foundations, are difficult to appeal to if we don't have this fundamental knowledge of ourselves and our practice to begin with. And sometimes a prompt like this is a great starting place to get that conversation going with ourselves. So anybody want to share maybe a focus area that they notice their work going into, or that they would maybe love for their work to go into? Again, no pressure. I just want to open up the door if anybody would like to share. I got weird in the chat. I love it.
That
I
is
think
a
that's a
brilliant.
great descriptor. Yeah. That's an awesome descriptor. I love it. And I think that's a great jumping off point for who's funding weird art, right? Where is experimental exploration going on? Who's interested in like something weird's happening and I'm excited about it. And here's my commentary. That's really, really awesome. Very cool. Okay, well, we have hit our time for this afternoon. I have a few extra minutes and I want to just open up the floor. Ruben and Amelia, if you have, even 5 extra minutes for any questions or final thoughts or anything that anybody joining us today might have. If you have a question, if you have a concern, anything that you might potentially be, interested in taking away from our chat today. And again, you can unmute yourself, you can drop a comment in the chat, whatever works best for you.
I was driving half the time here. Are these slides available by any chance?
That is a great question. We're recording this and we're going to send out the recording to everybody who's in attendance, so you will get them.
Awesome, thanks.
Of course. And thank you for joining us, even through driving. Ruben just dropped a chat to schedule an appointment with the Writing Center, which is incredibly, incredibly important. So please take advantage. I can't recommend enough from the creative careers perspective how often we are trying to send folks to the Writing Center, to the Learning Resource Centers on the whole. They are amazing partners, amazing student support, and we love them. I'm going to drop in the chat as well that you can reach Creative Careers at careers@artscenter.edu. And we'd love to hear from you as well. Though writing isn't our primary focus, and we would encourage you to go to the Writing Center, we'd love to help you. I'm happy to help you chat through funding opportunities, through how to find them, through how to maybe think more intentionally about our art practice and how we can answer some of these questions, especially if it feels really overwhelming. We're really just here to be a note of support and excitement, because I think that this is a series of incredible opportunities for everybody to participate in. Any last minute questions or thoughts from Ruben or Amelia as well?
Come see us at the Writing Center and talk about what you do, and we'll get started even if you've just got a blank page in front of you.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it. You can find us online or in person, however works best for you. And we have pretty good availability too. So get on there, make an appointment, and talk to somebody.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks everybody so much for joining us this afternoon. Again, my name is Eilish. I'm joined by Amelia and Ruben. It was a pleasure to have you. I hope that this was a really helpful chat and starting point for your own exploration of arts funding. Please be in touch with us. Keep an eye out for the recording of this workshop, and we would love to see you sometime soon. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.